For years, people believed they already knew the story. They thought silence meant peace, and distance meant closure. But silence does not mean the truth is gone. It only means it's waiting. Tracy Reiner stayed quiet while assumptions grew louder, while memories were rewritten, and while her own experience slowly disappeared behind other people's versions. What she finally revealed about Nick was not dramatic on purpose, and that is what made it so powerful. It wasn't said to shock, but once spoken, it changed everything. Because some truths don't explode when they come out. They sink in slowly, and once they do, they never leave you. Tonight, you're about to hear why Tracy stayed silent for so long, what finally pushed her to speak, and why the truth she shared was something nobody was ready to face. Tracy Reiner spent most of her life learning how to stay quiet when the world expected answers. Silence became a shield, something that protected her from questions she was not ready to face and from truths that felt too heavy to explain. People assumed that because she carried a famous name, her life must have been simple or privileged in every way. What they never saw was how complicated her emotional world truly was, especially when it came to Nick, a name that carried years of unspoken memories. From the outside, Tracy and Nick's connection looked ordinary, even unremarkable. There were no public fights, no dramatic headlines at first, and no obvious signs of conflict. But what happens behind closed doors often tells a very different story. Tracy remembers moments that seemed small at the time but slowly added up, moments where words were left unsaid and feelings were brushed aside. These moments didn't disappear. They stayed with her, shaping how she saw herself and the people around her. For a long time, Tracy convinced herself that staying silent was the mature choice. She believed that protecting others from discomfort was more important than protecting her own truth. Nick was someone she once trusted deeply, someone whose presence in her life carried emotional weight. That trust made the silence even harder, because speaking out felt like betraying not just him, but a version of herself that once believed things would turn out differently. As years passed, Tracy watched as stories about Nick evolved without her voice included. People filled in the gaps with assumptions, rumors, and half-truths. Each new version felt further away from what she actually lived through. It was painful to see her experiences turn into speculation, especially when those experiences had shaped her in ways no one could see. Still, she stayed quiet, telling herself that time would eventually smooth everything over. But time does not erase emotional impact. Tracy carried the weight of those years into her adult life, into relationships where she found herself second-guessing her own feelings. She often wondered if she was asking for too much, or if her expectations were unreasonable. That self-doubt did not come from nowhere. It was built slowly, through moments with Nick where her voice felt smaller and her concerns felt dismissed. There were times when Tracy wanted to speak out, moments when the truth felt like it was pressing against her chest, demanding to be heard. Interviews came and went, questions were asked carefully, and answers were given politely. Each time, she chose restraint. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she feared what honesty might cost. The fear of being misunderstood felt stronger than the need to explain herself. What many people fail to understand is that silence can become exhausting. Holding back the truth requires constant effort. Tracy reached a point where carrying the past quietly became more painful than the idea of confronting it openly. She realized that staying silent was no longer an act of strength, but a habit that was keeping her stuck. Nick was no longer actively part of her life, yet his influence lingered in ways she could no longer ignore. When Tracy finally allowed herself to reflect honestly, she saw how much she had minimized her own experiences. She remembered conversations where her concerns were brushed off, moments where she felt unheard, and situations where she was expected to adjust without question. These memories were not dramatic enough to make headlines, but they were powerful enough to leave lasting marks. That was the truth she had been avoiding. Breaking silence did not come suddenly. It was a gradual decision built on self-awareness and growth. Tracy reached a point where she understood that telling her story was not about blaming Nick or rewriting the past. It was about acknowledging how those experiences shaped her and giving herself permission to be honest. The truth didn't need to be exaggerated. It only needed to be real. When Tracy finally spoke, what surprised people most was her tone. There was no bitterness, no desire for revenge. She spoke calmly, carefully choosing words that reflected reflection rather than anger. She explained that her silence had never meant everything was fine. It meant she was still processing, still learning how to articulate emotions that had been ignored for too long. She admitted that for years she questioned herself more than she questioned Nick's actions. That realization was difficult to share because it meant admitting vulnerability. Tracy explained how easy it is to internalize doubt when your feelings are consistently minimized. Over time, that doubt can silence you completely, making it harder to trust your own judgment. What truly left people unprepared was Tracy's honesty about growth. She acknowledged that both she and Nick were shaped by circumstances, expectations, and miscommunication. But she also made it clear that understanding context does not erase impact. Some experiences leave scars, even when no harm was intended. That distinction was something she needed people to understand. As her words reached the public, reactions poured in. Some people expressed support, while others questioned why she waited so long. Tracy addressed that directly, explaining that speaking your truth requires readiness. Timing matters, and sometimes it takes years to fully understand your own emotions. Silence, she said, was part of her process, not a lie. By breaking her silence, Tracy reclaimed something she had given away for too long. She reclaimed control over her own narrative. The truth about Nick was never meant to shock, but honesty often does when people are used to incomplete stories. Tracy's decision to speak was not about reopening old wounds, but about finally allowing them to heal. In the end, Tracy Reiner's truth was not just about Nick. It was about learning to trust her own voice again. It was about understanding that staying quiet does not always mean being strong. Sometimes, real strength is found in choosing clarity over comfort. And for Tracy, finally speaking out marked the moment she stopped carrying the past alone. After Tracy Reiner finally broke her silence, life did not suddenly become easier, but it became clearer. For the first time, she was no longer carrying a story that belonged only to whispers and assumptions. Speaking the truth about Nick forced her to sit with emotions she had carefully managed for years. It was not dramatic, and it was not loud, but it was deeply personal. That honesty shifted something inside her that could never be undone. Tracy explained that silence had shaped her identity more than people realized. For years, she adjusted her reactions, softened her opinions, and chose restraint even when something felt wrong. This pattern did not appear overnight. It developed slowly, reinforced by the belief that keeping peace was more important than expressing discomfort. Over time, that belief became automatic. When she looked back at her connection with Nick, Tracy saw moments she once dismissed as insignificant. Small comments, subtle dismissals, and conversations that ended before her feelings were fully heard. None of these moments seemed serious on their own. Together, they created an emotional environment where she felt the need to stay quiet in order to be accepted. One of the hardest truths Tracy shared was how often she doubted herself. Instead of questioning situations, she questioned her reactions. She wondered if she was being too sensitive or expecting too much. That self-questioning slowly replaced confidence with caution. By the time she realized it, silence had become her default response. Tracy admitted that she once believed love meant endurance. She thought caring for someone required patience, understanding, and the ability to overlook discomfort. What she did not understand then was the difference between patience and self-erasure. That distinction only became clear years later, after distance gave her perspective. As she reflected more deeply, Tracy recognized how much energy it took to maintain silence. Every interaction required calculation. Every memory was filtered. She learned to speak around the truth instead of directly through it. That emotional labor followed her into other relationships, shaping how she communicated and how much space she allowed herself to take. Breaking her silence was not about exposing Nick. It was about exposing a pattern that no longer served her. Tracy made it clear that her truth was not meant to erase anyone else's experience. It was meant to add honesty where there had only been assumptions. That honesty felt risky, but necessary. She also spoke about timing. People often ask why someone waits so long to tell their truth. Tracy explained that understanding your own story takes time. When you are inside an experience, clarity is rare. It is only after growth, distance, and reflection that patterns become visible. Silence was part of her survival, not a sign of weakness. Once her story became public, Tracy faced reactions she expected and some she did not. Support poured in from people who recognized themselves in her words. Others questioned her motives or minimized her experience. Tracy accepted that response as part of the cost of honesty. Staying silent had cost her more. She shared that the most freeing moment was realizing she did not need universal approval. Her truth did not require agreement to be valid. That understanding allowed her to release the pressure to explain every detail. She had said enough. Tracy also reflected on forgiveness, a word often misunderstood. Forgiveness for her did not mean pretending nothing happened. It meant letting go of the need for resolution that might never come. Speaking the truth allowed her to forgive without forgetting. As the weight of silence lifted, Tracy noticed changes in herself. She became more direct, more confident, and more aware of her boundaries. Situations that once made her uncomfortable no longer went unspoken. Her experience with Nick became a lesson rather than a wound. She acknowledged that growth often comes with discomfort. Revisiting the past stirred emotions she thought were settled, but those emotions no longer controlled her. Facing them openly gave her back control she did not realize she had lost. Tracy emphasized that her story was not meant to shame or punish. It was meant to clarify. Clarifying the past helped her understand the present. It helped her see how much she had grown and how far she had come. Over time, the noise surrounding her revelation faded. What remained was a sense of calm. Tracy no longer felt the need to correct every misunderstanding. She trusted that the people who needed to hear her truth had heard it. Looking back, Tracy recognized that silence once protected her. It allowed her to function, to grow quietly, and to find her footing. But silence was never meant to last forever. Truth arrives when a person is strong enough to carry it. By finally speaking out, Tracy Reiner reclaimed ownership of her narrative. The truth about Nick was not explosive because it was dramatic. It was powerful because it was honest. And honesty, once spoken, cannot be taken back. In the end, this chapter of Tracy's life became about choice. The choice to speak instead of suppress. The choice to trust her voice instead of questioning it. The choice to move forward without carrying the weight of unspoken words. Her story reminds us that silence may feel safe, but it often hides growth waiting to happen. When the truth is finally spoken, it does not change the past, but it changes the person who carries it. For Tracy Reiner, breaking her silence was not the end of the story. It was the moment she truly began living it.